I'm back from spring break. As we move forward toward the end of the semester here, I wanted to make sure that folks are feeling oriented with the Wiki assignment, and if they're not, I wanted to give them some options for how to get oriented with the Wiki assignment and get some progress going there. So I thought it would be helpful for us to look at an example. But after we look at that example, we're also going to talk about opportunities for secondary research on this project. And we're going to talk about some different ways that you might be able to gather information about the person or the concept that you are researching here if you don't have direct access to them. But I thought this was a good example of the kind of wiki page we're trying to create here. It's got a nice table of contents. We have the information box over there. Maybe something we would want for the information box might be, if Catherine has a faculty portrait or something like that. A little enumeration of this person's early life, their career, their time at Northeastern University, and their different publications. So this is fine. This is exactly what we're looking for the wiki page. I do think it could be more multimodal, using some, maybe even links to other pages on the wiki, links to sources, or links to some of those publications. But otherwise, it's really, really strong stuff. So that's what I want to talk about this week as we move forward with the documentation challenge and as we move into the white paper challenge. I don't want people to forget about this assignment, and it's an experimental assignment for me, so I'm eager to see what folks do with it. That said, I have noticed that we don't have too many pages up right now. It looks like we've got about 18 pages or so. So we need more. We need more stuff on the wiki. And this video should help you with some of the research that you need to do in order to do that. So we talked about this distinction earlier in the semester when we talked about primary research, that there's these two types, primary and secondary. So primary research that you do on your own, that involves the collection of original data specific to a particular research project. When doing primary research, researcher gathers information firsthand rather than relying on available information databases and other publications. So if you've done an interview for your wiki so far, that's primary research. That's first person gathering of information. There's a lot of different kinds of primary research. We talked about interview, which is also called ethnography, last week. You can also use surveys, observation, data analysis, focus groups. So a classic example of this one here, observation, would be like Jane Goodall, right? When she went into the jungle to study the apes and gorillas and things like that, she was using observational research methods in order to, figure out some of their different traits and habits. I think the others are, pretty clear-cut. Surveys, we ask folks a bunch of different questions and we get feedback from them on those questions in different ways, and then we try to figure out how, in general, people feel about something from looking at a pretty substantial chunk of diverse information. And then focus groups are kind of like the same thing, but maybe more in like a business context, And then, data analysis. So something like a census would be like data analysis, where you're looking less for kind of like, how do people sort of feel about something, or how do they think about something, or how do they see something, more like, just kind of like hard data. How many houses are there in a city? How many people are living in each house? What do those people have access to in terms of facilities? That sort of thing. And then secondary research is the thing we really want to talk about today, because that's the thing that we're going to be predominantly using to complete our wiki pages. So while primary research involves active participation from the researcher themselves, secondary research involves the summary or synthesis of data and literature that has been organized and published by others. When doing secondary research, researchers use and analyze data from primary research sources. Which is somewhat true. You can also still use other secondary sources when you are doing secondary research. That's fine. It becomes a little convoluted when we get to like a source that's referencing a source that's referencing a source that's referencing a study. But if that's sort of the flow of knowledge and how it's moved through the conversation, that's the flow of knowledge and how it's moved through the conversation. So good areas for secondary research, obviously academic and peer-reviewed journals. We're going to talk about those when we talk about both the databases and Google Scholar, published books and articles. So, if something has gone through the publication process with a major publisher, we can kind of grant it, some level of authority there. Government agencies, any website that ends in a .gov, you're probably going to get good information from. Educational institutions like colleges and universities. Of course, we in the academy think that above all, we have a good credibility. And then commercial information sources. So this is information sources such as newspapers, magazines, and TV shows, which, is true. And I think when we're thinking about those kinds of sources, we might call those like popular sources as opposed to academic sources. But aside from just looking at those sources as kind of, indicators of what's happening in popular culture, there are also institutions that publish data as well for commercial purposes. So you also have these commercial research sources like the Pew Research Center, for instance. This is one that you would likely see cited pretty often. And they collect data about a lot of different cultural phenomena and try to help people understand those cultural phenomena through data. And they tend to be seen as like pretty reputable. So Pew isn't the only one. There's a bunch of them. But yeah, there are these secondary commercial information sources as well, which can be good if you're looking for information. Not necessarily, I think, that's based on, experiment and interview and ethnography and observation and all that stuff, but more so if you're looking for kind of like widely digestible swaths of survey results and things like that. In talking about secondary research, with students at Northeastern, one of the things that I've realized pretty quickly is that you all tend to prefer using Google Scholar, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. For those of you who have not used Google Scholar before, it's just a version of Google that gears you particularly toward scholarly, academic, and peer-reviewed results. So if I were to say, let's say something like AI content generation or something like that, and run a search, there's tons of articles here for me to browse. You can see that most of them are picking up my keyword of content generation, so I might lose the AI piece here. This is where you need to know your Boolean controllers for your search results. So there are certain cues that you can give a search engine that will cause it to either include or exclude certain information from your search. So here I put quotes around everything, which means now instead of searching for AI content generation, and content generation, and then just generation, it's going to search for AI content generation all together as one phrase, and it's only going to give me sources that use that entire phrase. That's not the only tool like that. So they call them the Boolean operators. They say they're simple words and or not and not used in conjunction to combine and exclude keywords in a search. There are more than this. Yep, they go over parentheses here as well, but those aren't the only ones. Maybe this is from MIT, so they might have more here. Yeah, so they've got using and, using or, using not, search order, again, by using the parentheses there. So yeah, I guess those are the big ones, your Boolean operators. So you're going to want to make sure that you're using those while you're searching through, whether it's Google Scholar or the Northeastern databases. You can also, customize your time range. You can look for different sorting options here. So you can sort them by relevance, sort them by date. you can change the types of articles that you're looking for, and then, whether or not you want to include citations or not. I'm pretty sure there's a place too where you can choose if you're looking for only things that are, full text. But you'll see this is actually like a pretty good search for Google Scholar, because it got me 25 results. You can see that if I search for something much more general, so let's say like marine biology, whales, 220,000 results. So that's like a really, a super general search, but that's one thing that you're going to want to think about too in constructing your searches. The more specific you can get about how you are phrasing your query, the less results you're going to get back, and that's actually better. Because if you're getting 220,000 results and there's a dozen good sources in there, that's a needle in a haystack. But if you're getting 25 and there's a dozen good sources in there, then you've got a pretty good research base for any project that you might want to execute. So the other thing that we're going to take a look at here is the Snell Library Research Databases. I think we tend to gravitate towards Google Scholar because we are comfortable with Google and we grow up using Google and we're familiar with it. But I would advise you to get outside of your comfort zone and explore the Northeastern library databases. So Northeastern does this nifty thing where if you are logged into your Northeastern accounts, you actually get all of the Northeastern database results in your Google Scholar results, which is super handy. Because you can kind of compile it all into one place. But what I'll tell you is this isn't the only place that you're going to do research in your life, and not all institutions have that kind of a setup. So it's still valuable to get into the databases, figure out how to use the databases, and get comfortable with the databases. So, here you can see on the library's homepage, they have this link to the databases. You can look at them from A to Z. There are so many. You can see right here that we're just looking through the A's right now. And you can see the little scroll bar over here. We're just down to the B's. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of databases. And what I will tell you about your access to these databases is that, you pay a lot of money to come to this school, and one of the things that you're paying for is this right here. And a lot of students don't think about it that way because it's not as obvious as, let's say, the food that you eat in the cafeterias on your meal plan, or the quality of your dorm, or the quality of instruction in one of your classes. But a big part of what you're paying for is access to data and information. You will lose this access when you leave the university. You pay for it via your tuition and fees, and the university gives you that access via your payment. And once you don't have access anymore, if you want to try to get access to, let's say, 5 or 6 of these databases, we're talking about hundreds in subscription fees per year, which is not something that you want to be kind of doling out yourself. So one of the things you should really think about here, as well as getting comfortable with database searches, because you're going to be asked to use different databases, is that this is kind of like an opportunity for you to say, well, I need to compile a bunch of research about things that I want to study beyond just my undergrad here, because this is when I have access to the information. And the only way for me to get affordable access to this information again is going to be to enroll in a graduate program somewhere where I get, again, university or college granted access to these databases based on some contract that the institution has with, let's say, the company, whether it's ProQuest, or McGraw-Hill. There's a lot of McGraw-Hill here, it looks like. But yeah. So these are the databases. You can search for specific databases. You can look at different types of databases here. So, archives and primary sources, probably something we want to look at. Articles, biographies, 3 whole databases just for biographies. That's pretty wild. But there's lots of different options here. So you can specify and say, I only want to look at stuff that's, I want to look at the ebook collection. And it'll give you just the ebook collection. And if you want to look on different subjects, that's how we research in these databases. So different databases and different database companies compile information for different subject areas. So EBSCOhost is one that I use often because it's big in the humanities. JSTOR is one that I use often because it's big in the humanities. So yeah, here on JSTOR, you can see, this is branded. Explore the world's knowledge, cultures, and ideas. That's how they brand their particular journal here. Or their particular, I should call it, database here. And they have on their homepage here some things that they are featuring at the moment. But the real thing is this search thing here. Search journals, books, images, and primary sources. So let's say that I wanted to do some research on, let's say, gender representation in the Beat movement. What am I going to get back for that? 17,974 results. So intertextual lives, reading the autobiographical texts of women writers in the Beat era. So this is essentially somebody is going through these different biographies of these figures from the Beat era who are critical because whether they were practicing artists and writers themselves, their male counterparts were writing about them in their own books and poems and things like that. So there's a lot of male representation of the women figures of the Beat movement. There's not a lot of women telling their stories of being parts of the Beat movement on their own. So if I wanted to learn more about that aspect of the Beat movement, this is the kind of text that I would be looking for. So this database searching thing is like kind of a skill. I'm okay at it. That's why I can just pop in some terms up there and then I'll get something relevant for at least, my first couple of results here. But you can see gendered representation in Hawaii's anti-GMO activism is not even close to anything that I'm trying to do here. And then the dynamics of desire, sexuality, gender, and pornography and performance also doesn't really have much to do with the Beat movement. So I'm getting more of like gender studies type things here because I've got gender in there, but I'm looking for feminist literary critique. So I don't know if it's going to improve. If I put it all in quotes, it doesn't happen. So let me try this then. Feminist literary critique, Beat movement. A feminist critique of the feminist critique of pornography. So probably you're wondering why all of these quests about the Beat movement are turning up results about pornography. And I think in order to do that, you'd have to look more into the history of the Beat movement and what it was. I would direct you toward Allen Ginsberg's Howl and the very famous California Supreme Court case that tried to try Allen Ginsberg with the publication of pornography for publishing Howl. It was deemed not pornography. It was deemed to be a work of poetry that had redeeming social value. But that's probably why there's a lot of tipping over in the conversation here. So, here I think, I'm having trouble kind of finding specific things here because I do think this is a less kind of studied topic. Really, this one seems to be the best source I can find. This is an interesting one. It doesn't have anything to do with the Beat movement, but Zora Neale Hurston is a fantastic author. A lot of talk about hip hop because whenever you get into countercultures and talking about countercultures, there's the most studied one I would say is hip hop at this point in terms of the beats, punk. The Transcendentalists would probably be the other most studied. So with the databases, the idea is that you've got to figure out kind of which databases are the kinds of databases that publish articles and books and things about what you are trying to research. And then once you do that, figuring out how to come up with good search queries should get you good sources for whatever project it is that you're working on here. So if you're working on a wiki project where, you're maybe looking at a person, but they don't have much on their website biography, looking through their publications through one of these databases, you could search them by name. Might be an interesting way to kind of come up with a bibliography for them or even a timeline of their career because you can kind of track what they're interested in and what they're studying based on the chronology of their publications. I think also another thing that we would want to do here is when we are dealing with someone who is expert in a topic that maybe we don't understand that well, to do a little research on the topic itself so we can have some broader contextual understanding of it. But I think also, too, if you're looking for information on concepts that are hard to find information on, this is where you're going to find them. And if you're looking for, because this is where the most current stuff is always being published. And if you're looking for information about people who you don't have, personal access to, but they don't have a lot of really sort of like public data compiled about them, you can use the university databases to figure out at least what they've written and where it's been published and what the trajectory of their career has been. This is also going to be useful for you when you're doing the next project as well, which is going to require a ton of secondary research. So the last thing I want to talk about today are the folks who work at the library, because I think this is another common misconception that college students have. You have subject librarians in your college or university library, and that's good to know because that means that you have on campus somebody who is a top-notch expert, not in your field, but at researching in your field. They probably have some pretty good contextual field knowledge as well, but these are folks who went to school at the graduate level specifically to figure out how research works and how to facilitate research for undergraduate and graduate students. So these are folks who usually hold a degree in what's called information science. I think this is an underrated resource for undergraduate students, and I think undergraduate students are sometimes hesitant to kind of put themselves out there and say like, hey, let me work with a research professional. You should. You can learn so much about research from sitting down with one of these folks and just watching how they facilitate your research process as you tell them what you're working on. So it's good to know who these folks are, especially in your field. So here we've got Jody, who's an engineering librarian. We have Philip, who's a health sciences librarian. Lori, also health sciences. Brian looks like he's in some kind of administrative position there. Entrepreneurship librarian, and Kyle here, sciences librarian. That doesn't look super relevant to us. Data analysis, visualization specialist too. So, let's say next unit when you're working on your white paper, you want to put together a graph of some data that you found about, how folks are accessing the Wicked Free Wi-Fi program that we're going to be working on. Kate might be a good person to go to. We also have Lusoni here, who is a STEM librarian in general. So if you're working just in kind of general STEM fields, you can get something from them. First year experience for STEM and entrepreneurship, probably something that's not super useful to you all at this point. And then we have Alyssa, head STEM and entrepreneurship. So you can see lots of these folks all specialized in specific areas, but not specialized necessarily in the practice of those specific areas, but specialized in the research of those areas. So if you go to the kind of the head circulation desk, if you reach out to one of these people by email, if you book an appointment using the Northeastern Library Appointment Services, however you do it, you can kind of say like, hey, I'm doing this project on this and I'm having trouble, researching it. And I wondered if you could give me a hand. If we were all doing projects in the humanities, I could be that person for you to some degree. But when it comes to researching in the hard sciences, I'm not as experienced, and I wouldn't want to pass on any kind of, mis or disinformation about how to do that stuff based on my own inexperience. So I would defer you to the research experts. They are on your campus. They're in your library. You don't even necessarily need to meet with them in person. I'm sure they do virtual visits as well. You might even be able to get what you need just from an email exchange. But if you've ever been just sort of befuddled about how to begin or conduct a secondary research project, this is the resource for you. And it amazes me how many people, myself included, go through undergrad without ever knowing that resource is there and without ever knowing what that resource is actually for. So this is another way that you can approach this process too. These are research guides that the library has put together. So for instance, Let's say you are, let me find a good, we'll do marine and environmental science. Let's do civil and environmental engineering, since that seems kind of most relevant to our purposes in this class. Again, this is Jody's subject area, so she's starting with Scholar 1 and also this Novell library source, and then she says if you need articles to use these particular databases, if you're looking for technical reports here, anti-racism and engineering here, so all different kinds of particular so what Jody is doing here is she's essentially setting up like a research course for you, right? Like if you're researching in these areas, go here, go there, and then see what you get. It's probably good to go through that process before you reach out to one of these library science folks to make an appointment, so that you get more out of the appointment than just kind of them going over the study guide with you or the research guide. So keep that in mind. The Snell Library might not have any books that you can look at. Tons of resources still. And the most important resources are the people. So figure out what librarians help people who are in your field area. Make friends. They can teach you all kinds of things about research that will drastically expand your academic horizons. Final unit of our course, it's worth thinking about the last two projects that we'll have to finish up. The Red Link Wiki and your white paper competition, which hasn't been assigned yet. But these two projects are specifically research based. You might say, well, the paper was too, but you'd already started your research there. So it's not starting a research project from scratch. That's what we'll be doing with the wiki. That's what we'll be doing with the final project as well. So it's worth thinking about right now, familiarizing yourself and getting comfortable with those different methods of gathering information.